Hey everyone, Ben Walters here with Customer Tech Talks. You may have seen us in the Fall Ignite, but we're back for 2021 with a whole new set of customers ready to share their stories, their learnings, and their journeys with you, talking about all of the things they've experienced when working with Microsoft technology. So let's jump into it. Today, I am joined by Tom Harris from ClearBank, who's going to discuss not only how they migrated to Azure, but how they took advantage of Azure availability zones to build highly available infrastructure that ensures top performance for processing payments. Let's take a look at the video.
ClearBank is as the name suggests, a clearing bank. So we're at the centre of all payments in the UK infrastructure for payments. We have over 5 million accounts on our system. We hold in over £1 billion in balances. By enabling over 100 financial institutions to offer financial services, we're bringing options to the market. So it enables people to bank however they want to bank and manage their money in the way that they want to manage their money.
So Thomas is the head of engineering for ClearBank. Tom, great to have you with us.
Hi Ben, thanks for having me.
Now, ClearBank's one of the youngest clearing banks in the UK and the first to be established in over 250 years. And you're responsible for processing transactions, everything from, kind of batch processing all the way through to one-off transactions between individuals. And I really can't imagine what it takes to build a system like this from the ground up, even with today's technology and infrastructure. Can you take me a little bit through the architecture and the journey you've taken to get to where you are today?
Yeah, sure, Ben. So we have three core payments in the UK. Faster payments, which is high volume, but slightly lower transactional value. We have BACS, which is our overnight batching processes. And then we have CHAPS, which is our higher value and lower volume payments. And each of them poses a unique scalability challenge and availability challenge. Now, when ClearBank started, we had our on-premise infrastructure, and we started there because we had to have direct connections into the schemes, and we also have to meet a requirement of having a physical HSM that we can touch. So as we progressed on our journey and volume started to go up, we started to recognize that we needed to address them profiles of each of the payment schemes. This is where we started to look at how we could leverage the cloud more. And historically, we had just had our APIs, our webhooks and our customer portals in the cloud, but we wanted to put our core computing and data stores in the cloud too. As part of the move, we started to look at how we could re-architect our system as a whole and ensure that we're bringing not just those profiles of availability, but also additional security to our platform as well. As the journey went on, we looked to effectively remove state from most of our applications and move them into the cloud. So the end result was that we just had our connectors to the scheme and we just had the HSMs in the on-premise bit. Enabling in each of the schemes to scale to meet their own needs in their own timeframes and have the right availability profiles for each of the needs of the scheme to meet the SLAs expected by our customers.
Gotcha. And you also, when we think about this journey you've gone through, you started that migration process, but it wasn't something that historically a lot of organizations have done. As you've gone from kind of that, critical systems sitting on premises and moving those to the cloud, you took an approach with that migration to make it repeatable and something you could do over and over again. Can you take me through that decision and how you achieved that?
We took the approach that we were going to effectively rebuild the plane in flight. So we looked to how we could do that in a more iterative manner rather than a big bang, because just historically, like big bang changes don't tend to end as well. So the best approach that we found there was to leverage infrastructure as code and try to build repeatable pipelines and automate testing around those pipelines as well to enable us to validate what each of the moves we were going to make. It's really gave us a great stance at the end because now we've got the ability to push out multiple releases in any given day, knowing that process is going through the same pipelines as it went through 100 times before.
And I know when we discussed this earlier, you used a really interesting kind of, I guess, colloquial classification system for your systems, which was you classified some as cattle and some as pets, which I think is really interesting because we all like to think that all of our systems are our pets and we want to keep them, as best we can. But can you explain a little bit about that classification you took and why you took that approach for each of your systems?
Yeah, so we definitely started at cattle and pets and kind of evolved it now to a four-tier system to enable us to ensure that we're putting the right level of energy into each of the different applications. So some of our tier one applications, for example, we would consider them where we're connecting to, say, a scheme and we're the receiver of payments, and therefore we need to make sure that we can always receive them payments. But then we offload that to an asynchronous process, which maybe is like a tier two application, where we've still got to meet SLAs and SLOs, but we've got a little air of grace there. The end customer isn't going to notice blips in our network. And then we go to tier three and tier four, where effectively we have some offline processes which interact with our payments, but they aren't necessarily as critical. So when we're talking about our tier ones, we want to have as few a tier one level of application as possible, and therefore removing things like state from our applications and really enabling us to embrace what happens in the cloud, which is things scale up, things scale down, patches happen when you don't know they're going to happen sometimes. So these sort of activities that mean the services can go down at any time, and then ultimately you embrace failure as a consequence.
Gotcha. And that's a really great kind of view to take of that idea of embracing failure. And that's something you've actually dealt with as well. You've had some real world outages that you've gone through, and this resilient infrastructure you've built has been kind of, I guess, a cornerstone in helping you survive those. Can you take me through some of those, outages and where you've seen that happen and what the experience has been, not just for ClearBank, but also for your customers?
Yeah, as you mentioned, we've experienced a real world outage in a sense. So we had a zonal outage on Azure, and luckily for us, we had invested in this space and we had got to a place where we had adopted availability zones. And in this scenario, we didn't experience any customer impact. Our payments carried on going as expected. We did get some alerts and we nervously was watching, but everything could come back to as expected. But we also have adopted through this process, we've looked at how we should continue to embrace that failure, but proactively embrace it. And we've adopted like a much more stringent resiliency testing process around our infrastructure.
And that's great. And it's actually, I think it's one of the things that a lot of businesses who try to build, failover processes and techniques into their systems tend to miss, is that ability of how do they test it? How do they make sure it works? So when it does happen, they know that they can deal with it. So really great to have you with us, and thank you so much. But one last question before we finish up here, which is, what are some of the things you've learned through this process? And if other businesses are looking to go on and start to, work on resiliency for their own systems or take this approach, what are some recommendations you'd give them in getting started and how to approach that?
Yeah, sure. So infrastructure as code, I would say, is the one thing that everyone has to adopt in terms of enabling that iterative approach to development. But one of the things you'll have to address there is upskilling your team to be able to leverage that. I think one of the things in hindsight, I think that if we adopted it earlier, we could have had a better journey, was the resiliency testing I mentioned. Like if we had made sure we had tested the different aspects, we might have been able to invest our dev dollars in the right way and get the most bang for our buck. But yeah, so they're two of the key areas that I would kind of recommend to anyone.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for joining us and making the time, Tom. Really appreciate you being with us. And of course, if you want to take some time to learn about how to build your own resilient architecture or get started with Azure Availability Zones, we have links here that you can check out on Microsoft.com. So you can go and check those out for yourself and also start your own journey. So Tom, great to have you with us and really appreciate you making the time to join us on Customer Tech Talks.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. It's been really fun and enjoyed sharing the ClearBank story.
Thank you again for joining us on the very first Customer Tech Talk of 2021. We're always looking for new customers to feature as part of the show. So if you happen to be working on that new Azure solution, maybe you're doing a complex migration to Microsoft 365, or perhaps you're working on that new Power App to help innovate your business. If that's the case, we want to hear from you. Head on over to Microsoft Customer Tech Talks to get started and submit your story. Of course, you can also follow us on Twitter and YouTube and LinkedIn to keep up to date on all the new things that are happening with Microsoft Customer Tech Talks. And we look forward to seeing you on the next show.